I tell you what, the hottest show in America right now, Stephen K. Bannon, War Room Pandemic, airs 11 to noon across my network and other stations. And I got to tell you what, I don't care where you are at 11 a.m., this is the number one show to be tuned in. They got the best information. They've been covering it from the beginning. Bannon's all over it. He was on Maria Baratonoma yesterday on her show, Sunday Futures. 9-minute interview. We've got it up on our website. Probably one of the best interviews I've ever heard on that, and politics, and Joe Biden. And Steve Bannon today live, Wall Street. He's with us from New York. Steve, great to have you with us, man.
John, thanks for having us, and thank you very much for co-producing the show, having the courage early on when I first talked to you when impeachment was starting to wind down that I said, hey, there's this massive historical event that's happening in the middle of China, and you looked at me like, have you lost your mind? I said, no, I want to do an entire show about this and do it, eventually 7 days a week because it's gonna potentially change history. So thank you for having courage to back us.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thanks for all you've done. And your War Room Pandemic show is must-listen radio. You're also on America's Voice.news. That's on a video. By the way, America's Voice.news, I got a chance to talk to the owners and the founder in CPAC. They have a great vision for this company. It's very exciting. They're now on the Dish Network, Channel 219. 24/7 coverage, so they're a new satellite network. Steve, though, I want to get to the coronavirus here and what you're doing with it, and I'm going to start by playing a clip. It's yesterday, which you called which I'm calling the China Future and Trump Economic Thesis, which is probably the thing that nobody understands. And I think in less than a minute, you articulated this more powerful than anybody I've heard. So I'm going to start with that, and then we'll go on. Kira, let's get to Cut 7, Steve Bannon.
Now you're looking at companies wondering if they could trust China anymore. What does this mean for China and their plans for 2030 and their plans to take over the U.S. in terms of being number one?
This is the central part of Trump's economic thesis. The China price comes at a huge cost. Right? You've had this globalization project always looked at essentially slave labor in China, making the absolute lowest cost of production and shipped throughout the world. And you had One Belt, One Road. You've had, Made in China 2025. You've had Huawei, the whole Huawei situation. President Trump has said, hey, the industrial democracies have to bring the supply chain back. And all the Wall Street cheerleaders, you didn't see them cheering last week. Because now we understand that not just national security, but health security is inextricably linked with having this logistics chain in the middle of China.
What is happening now? We've got additional cases breaking over the weekend. Steve, are we looking for another?
Okay, so this is the reason
crash?
We did the show. This is the reason we did the show. John, as you know, 3 days a week I try to broadcast separately into China to the Chinese people about the CCP. So I've been in and around China since the mid-'70s when I was a naval officer out of on a destroyer out of San Diego that was in the South China Sea around Hong Kong and the places in the East China Sea, Korea and Japan. And so, I understand, have a pretty good feel for the scale of China and how the globalists have really made China the manufacturing center of the world with this logistics chain that goes all the way through from China to the West, and we've shipped all the jobs. It's one of the reasons Trump's president. He said it at State of the Union when he said, hey, trade was probably the reason I decided to run for president. It's the reason we won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. All the factories have gone to China. All the jobs, the high-value added manufacturing jobs have gone to China, and you're left with the opioids epidemic that's come in here as people have lost hope and lost kind of direction. Well, when this virus broke out, and you've had many of these things happen in China over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the reason is the population is now so dense, 1.4 billion people. They've brought all the peasants, they brought all the farmers and the workers and their kids into these mega cities where these massive manufacturing plants are. And you just had a continuation, the Hong Kong flu, SARS, swine flu, they lost half of their hog population in August and September. And the people in Virginia know Smithfield hams. Smithfield's been bought by China. The reason is it's a pork-driven society. So I knew something was going on given my relationships, given the way that we broadcast around the time of Lunar New Year, because Chinese New Year is a bigger holiday for them than Christmas is for us. Everybody goes home, they go back to see their parents, they go back to their families. It's the largest migration in human history once a year. Nothing was happening. And I said, on this scale, if this thing is this bad, it's going to have two things. Number one, it's going to blow throughout the world as far as a pandemic on the health side, but as importantly, an economic contagion is also going to blow through here, because people don't realize, as we've studied, as President Trump has argued for years, we've had this woman, Rosemary Gibson, so much of our vital material, electronics, etc., is all made in China, but particularly our health care. API, I think it's called the Associated Pharmaceutical Ingredients, the basics for making all the drugs, 90% of that's made in China. We can't make penicillin, we can't make antibiotics, we can't make vitamin C, we can't make aspirin, we don't make the masks, we don't make the gloves, we don't make the surgical gowns. All of that is made in China. We have basically, Wall Street and the corporatists over the last 25 or 30 years have looked for what's called the China price. The China price and just-in-time inventory. Just-in-time inventory means they hit the barcode in the store, it goes back eventually to a factory in China, they make additional and they ship it. That means in warehouses, on ships, and in stores, they only keep X amount of inventory. And the reason is to drive profit margins, to keep it off their balance sheet. All of those chickens are coming home to roost right now. That's why you're going to go into a Costco store, you're going to go in some of these other places, try to buy stuff, the shelves are going to be cleared out. Well, we're not going to have, it's going to be very tough to kind of replenish this. Now, why did we do the show? We did the show so people would not get hysterical. People would not panic. This is what President Trump said. Nothing's inevitable. But people have to understand the truth. Here's the truth, is that this virus is going to spread, but it can be very contained. And by the way, if you listen to our experts, for the vast majority of people, 80 or 90% of people, it's like it's a cold. Some people will never show symptoms at all. Now, for certain people, and we don't understand if it's just because of age or whether you're a smoker or what's the issue, it can become a lot worse. And then obviously it looks like it has a mortality rate of around 2%. The problem is how it's transmitted, and we have turned everybody over to these studies at Johns Hopkins and all these professors. Gabriel Leung from Hong Kong University, who's the expert that defeated SARS. We've gone to Johns Hopkins, and they've got studies, and the studies say, hey, a big part of mankind could catch this, but it's a version of the common cold. But for certain elements of society, it's quite deadly, and that's why you see the handling of this with people in hazmat suits, etc. Now, what went on in China, and still going on in China, is just absolutely heroic. They quarantined a area the size of France with about 80 million people. When I say quarantine, they locked it down hard. They locked it down and went door to door and checked people. That's something that even in the United States we could never possibly do. They did that to stop this break. The Chinese Communist Party, who, by the way, has lied about everything since this started. They also put in lockdown about another 500 million people. That's approximately 2 times the size of the population of the United States. Okay, in some form of lockdown from Beijing to Shanghai, so as to have social separation, so the virus would not spread. Because until a vaccine is found, and there won't be a vaccine for a while, you've got to do this through social separation. Now, what President Trump did boldly at the beginning of this, when we first found out back in January, he stopped travel from China. In addition, he instituted quarantines of people coming back, which had not been done in 50 years. That bought us time for the public health officials to essentially, be able to get ahead of this or try to get ahead of this. But it's going to be quite complicated. People realize that, public health at the local level is a hit or miss thing. In some areas it's pretty good. In other areas it's terrific. In some areas it needs some work. And so we're going to definitely see holes in it. You're going to see things that don't go according to plan. But President Trump, what he said is nothing's inevitable. And what we have to fear, the only thing we have to fear here is fear itself. So, people should just get more information. Everybody's covering this now, trying to cover it. We're very proud of our show because we think we get the best experts on there today, and just having a feel for how things work. As I told John, there were people coming from all over the world, but I thought that being on Wall Street last week was going to be important. I kind of shifted my schedule because I thought we might be near a historic meltdown in the market. So we came up here Wednesday after we had a dinner at CPAC for all the populists and nationalists throughout the world over at the Hay Adams Hotel, and then I came up here late Wednesday night and was here for Thursday and Friday, which were both historic, which I kind of felt they would be. Last night, people should know, overnight in the Asian markets, they started off horrifically. In the Bank of Japan, Bank of Japan is like the Federal Reserve of the United States. They stepped in with they stated that we're going to have unlimited liquidity here, or liquidity for the Japanese market. People should know that we're going to fight this. We're going to, the government's going to fight the virus, but we're going to sit here and make sure that the industrial companies are backed up, et cetera. Now, and the market rose after that. The stock market overnight, the futures market, which is kind of a bet on how the market's going to open at the beginning and where stocks are going to go, was up 500 points, and now it's down. I think the last time I looked, it was down a couple of hundred. So you've had 1,000-point swings overnight. And here's the reason. People just don't know. There's two forms of issues we got to deal with in the economy. Number one is obviously the travel, the hotels, the conferences being canceled. People saying, hey, I just don't feel like traveling now, et cetera. People going to the stores and doing all this, buying overnight, how that's going to impact. So that part of the economy is a lot of uncertainty. Of course, the stock market loves uncertainty because the stock market, remember, is just the future value of earnings, as it's the net present value today, what you would pay for those earnings. And so people are uncertain where Walmart's going to be, where the airline's going to be, where Boeing's going to be. So it's uncertainty, right? And President Trump, I think, has done a good job with Larry Kudlow and others of trying to say, hey, look, we're going to work through this thing. The deeper issue, the issue that has to be addressed, and I think we'll be addressing this, and this is where the real uncertainty comes from, is systemic. And that systemic issue is China has built itself up as, and Wall Street and the city of London, the big financial areas, have built China up as essentially the manufacturing base for the world with this complicated logistics chain, the supply chain that comes out of China. And right now, I think people are really rethinking that. That's why I keep saying the China price, which was always the lowest price, and every person listening to your show knows they go into Walmart and they're always looking for the low price. So that low price essentially comes from the excess capacity and deflation that China is able to do because they finance, the state-owned industries finance these businesses. But that China price comes at a huge cost, and we're seeing that cost today. And I think you're going to see I believe, the beginning of a fundamental restructuring of the world's economy around this, that people are going to understand that, hey, we can have some things in China, but we can't have all of the production in China. The production has to come back to the industrial democracies, to Japan, to the USMCA, which is the new NAFTA, which really positioned Mexico, the United States, and Canada as a geostrategic manufacturing alternative to China, also to Western Europe. And so I think and that's one of the reasons the stock market is just going to be choppy. So people, I think, is the thing I recommend the strongest is just start looking at news, start getting information, start going online. People out there got great common sense. Understand that there's no need to panic here. Just keep your head about you. Just understand this, get more and more information, and proceed accordingly.
Steve, for years the globalists were telling us that the supply chain in China didn't matter, that it was good for business, it was good for profits, it was good for Wall Street, it was good for investment, and it didn't matter. Now all of a sudden they're panicking and say, well, it matters tremendously. What the hell happened?
Well, you don't see the cheerleaders. This is the thing. You don't see all the cheerleaders. You don't see all the people in the room with President Trump goading him on to do these China deals. You don't see the Wall Street cheerleaders on. They weren't on Maria yesterday. They're not on the Squawk Box this morning. You didn't see them last week on Friday when we had the biggest single drop in the history of the New York Stock Exchange, right, on an absolute basis, not a percentage basis. You didn't see these guys out there as cheerleaders. They're all running for the hills. Right. This is something that people like myself and other economic nationalists, and obviously guys like Lou Dobbs and Donald Trump, have preached for decades, that you can't put all your eggs in one basket, that it's insane to ship all your manufacturing. Look at Virginia. I mean, the John Fredericks Radio Network, hey, I don't have to tell people in Southside Virginia about the furniture business. I don't have to talk to people about the textile business, right? We had a vibrant, growing, I had guys on from Alabama last week on War Room 2020 on a special edition. You get online, the guys who make the furniture cabinets, that's still a $10 billion business, and exactly what's happening to them today is what happened to the furniture business in Southside Virginia and North Carolina, 25 years ago. Look at Smithfield Hams. The Chinese Communist Party has come in and eviscerated many of the great industries in the United States. And hey, guess what? I'm a protectionist. I don't mind tariffs. I don't mind protecting those business. Will costs be a little higher? You're absolutely right. Cost is going to be a little higher. But you know what? You're going to have a vibrant Southside Virginia. Those cities down there would be vibrant with manufacturing jobs. Those cities in North Carolina would be vibrant with manufacturing jobs. And are you going to pay a little more at Walmart? You absolutely are going to pay a little more at Walmart. But are you going to have more vibrant communities? Are you going to have families with great jobs? Are you going to have those places like there were back in the 40s and 50s and 60s when there was vibrant in 70s before all of a sudden all the jobs got shipped away? Right, so it's economic basis. I don't talk about the cultural issues we had, and we had to work through all that as we did as Virginians and as Tar Heels, right? But the issue is that the vibrant, robust jobs of the states of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the states of North Carolina, many of those where it's ripped out by these financiers, shipped to China, where it's made at a low price and normally cheap costs. And this is why, I'm a supporter of the Chinese people. They're the slaves here. They're the victims. Trust me, on this virus, it's the people in Wuhan and Hubei. If you go online and see the videos, it is horrific what happened to them. And don't believe the official statistics. Don't believe 80,000 and 2,000. There's many more. There's reports out there's millions infected in China, hundreds of thousands of dead. And these are not conspiracy theories. These are many sites that could do this calculation. In Iran today, China's partner, there are many more dead. Iran's got the second worst breakout. There are many more dead than are being, the regime will admit to. And here's the reason. Those societies suppress information. So I think for your viewers today, if you get there and get more information, if you listen to Pandemic or go back and listen to all the old podcasts and see the people we've had on here, you'll have, I think, a pretty good sense of what's going on and understand what President Trump says. Nothing is inevitable. We can get ahead of this.
Are the Democrats weaponizing this?
Well, look, Joe Biden, and this is where I think the specifics, we ought to get specific. When Vice President Pence was asked this, to me, number one, Trump did a bold move, historic move, when he stopped the flights in from China, ended the quarantine. Joe Biden said he's a racist, he's a xenophobe, he's a nativist. That day, Joe Biden went right to identity politics, which no Chinese American and no Chinese person would agree with. They thought it was a prudent and smart thing to do. When Trump was coming back from India to give a speech, Nancy Pelosi said Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, right? And Trump at the first press conference said, let's rise above this. We got to work together. This is not a partisan issue. Then the Democrats came out and said, media started making a big deal about Fauci and the scientists being muzzled. Fauci went on the podium and said, that's just totally untrue. I haven't been muzzled. So, yes, they've been trying to take an edge from day one. We've got to, but you know what? Let's put all that in back of us. We got to rise above this. We got to rise above this. And quite frankly, the Trump administration, particularly like on the testing kits, there's been some speed bumps here. And people should understand there are going to be speed bumps in the future. This is not going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. It's just not. Just by the nature of it, it's not going to be perfect. But if we hang together, use common sense, just get more information. Don't believe what people tell you. Go online, listen to John Fredericks, go to Pandemic. But, hey, don't even believe us. Go check it out. Check the links we got to the sites. Just get more information. Particularly, I think it's important for people to understand what's going on globally. It's very important to understand what's going on in China. Until you understand the China aspect of this, you will not understand fully how this is going to impact your life. And I think Americans overall ought to start getting more involved in understanding world events, because it's all tied economically to you going to your job today. What's happening in the world has an impact. Like I told people when we first started the Pandemic show, when people said, Bannon, this is another thing, you got your hair on fire, I said, no. You may not have an interest in this virus, but this virus has an interest in you. And you've got to understand what's going on here, so people should just get more information. And, John, I can't thank you enough for supporting the show. I think it's shown once again we got a pretty good sense of what the next big thing is.
No question about it. Here's let's get to Cut 14 yesterday, Steve, on Maria Bartiromo, saying that this is Trump's Churchill moment, Kara, Cut 14.
This is Trump's Churchill moment. He's got to bring the country together, which he's doing. He's got to confront not just the virus, but the economic contagion that's coming out of China that Rubio talked about. He does that. You don't need to worry about 2020.
All right, Steve, elaborate.
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think he's going to be weighed and measured about how he handles this crisis. I don't think, as I've said, time and time again, there's nobody on that stage, from Michael Bloomberg to now, Mayor Pete to Bernie Sanders to Joe Biden is going to defeat Donald Trump. right? So it's they're going to bring in Hillary Clinton. They may bring in Michelle Obama, but I think it's a referendum on President Trump and on how he's comported himself and his actions. He's had a great run so far, but this is a challenge unlike I think any president has ever had. This is much deeper than Ebola. It's much deeper than SARS. It's much deeper than other aspects we had. These are kind of the wars of the 21st century. These, because of the density in population, the inextricably linked nature of the world's economy, that these things are going to continue to pop up, and they're obviously very, very serious. President Trump, and I think what he said is most powerful, nothing is inevitable. And what Trump means by that is that human action and human agency are the things that matter here, and working together. And I think President Trump, this is his Churchill moment. I think he pulls this together. 2020 will take care of itself. And I think you'll see a lot less of him campaigning right now and more focus on this. He just announced, which I think is terrific, he's going to go to Atlanta, to CDC. He's going to go over to the National Institute of Health. He's getting much more hands-on in this, much more engaged in this. Pence is doing a good job as the head of the thing. I advocated they should bifurcate the committee and start an economic committee with Kudlow and Peter Navarro and others to talk about supply chain and other issues. I eventually think that'll happen because this is so complicated. You need two groups. But look, if you wanted somebody to be here, Joe Biden, the very first day, is accusing Trump of xenophobe, which Trump, what that did was buy us time. In these issues, time is what matters. Mm-hmm. And President Trump bought the country time to get organized on this. And so I think if you want somebody as commander-in-chief, you want a businessman who works on Trump time. And remember, Trump time it should have been done yesterday. So I think this is President Trump, and I think very confident President Trump is on top of this, and is going to be on top of it going forward.
Steve Bannon back with us. I want to get to politics. By the way, Steve, I thought that was one of the best interviews. I just have to say it again on Fox News Sunday Futures yesterday on the coronavirus that I've seen, bar none. We've got it up on our website. Check it out. It's also on warroom.org. Steve, I want to get to Joe Biden's victory in South Carolina. It's a big victory. He won by 30. You get the pundits on Sunday now asking Bloomberg to drop out. He's not been on a single ballot. All of a sudden, Joe Biden wins a state, and he's back being coronated. What's going on here?
Well, I think, look, it's all about stopping Bernie, and I think the thing that came out of South Carolina, the big, and I see the media's picked up on it today. They didn't at first, but I think the most important thing is the African-American vote, which is a very practical, pragmatic vote, is not buying what Bernie's selling. They're not buying this revolution. They're not buying socialism. And, the entire centrist part of the Democratic Party, the establishment of the Democratic Party, which is obviously pretty far left, they are anti-Bernie, stop Bernie at any measure. The African-American vote, which I think was surprisingly big for, the numbers for Biden, particularly if you looked at the way he campaigned. I thought most of it was pretty weak. I thought he once again showed, to me at least, he'd never be able to stand up to Trump. They galvanized around him. And Super Tuesday has a lot of the southern states in it, right? A lot of southern states where African-American vote is quite critical. The thing for, Buttigieg to get Mayor Pete out, to get Klobuchar out, is to have an alternative to Bernie. They're going to have to beat Trump with Bloomberg's money. So, there's some signs that Bloomberg's not buying the TV time and reversing the TV time after Tuesday. So we're going to have to see what happens. But I don't think if Bloomberg represents them, particularly the state, Virginia is obviously important. North Carolina is important about how Bloomberg does, but particularly California. I have heard that he's put up to upwards to $90 million because California is an entire TV state. That's the only way you can really compete there. And if he's below 15%, and in fact, if Biden's below 15%, I think they already had, a huge amount of early voting in California. So we'll have to see what happens. But if they're under 15% statewide, that'll have a huge impact on the Bernie movement. But I think right now, and I've said this from day one, Clinton's going to come in, maybe even Michelle Obama. The Democratic establishment will find some way to steal this from Bernie at the end of the day.
Steve Bannon, let's play this out. Bernie, he's going to have a great night tomorrow. He's going to win Texas. He's likely to win the majority, if not all of the delegates in California if the others go under 15%. He had just had two rallies there, Steve, on Sunday. He had a total of 27,000 people show up. This guy's got a movement going on. If he's able to do this and he gets to Milwaukee, by the way, we're going to be there. We know you're going to be there with us. and he's got 15, 1,600, and then Warren's got 300, Bloomberg's got 400. How do you steal it from him and not have the
It's
place
pretty
burned
simple.
down?
It's pretty simple. If he doesn't have, what is it, 1950, whatever the number is, if he doesn't have 1910 on round one, they're going to steal it from him. I think it's very low probability, Bernie, right now at least, that Bernie's, if it goes to ballot two where the super delegates start coming in, but I think that we'll propose an alternative. If he shows up with 1,600 or something like that, I think you'll see Michelle Obama or Hillary Clinton, the specter of those, because the Clintons and the Obamas control the Democratic Party. Bernie's not a Democrat; he's a socialist, right? And Bloomberg's still a liberal Republican mayor. They need Bloomberg's capital; they need it. But here's what I would also tell people: it's just like on the impeachment. Don't get ahead of yourselves. Let's deal with these things. That's why the impeachment was so important, I think, for us to do that show that you helped us get launched back in October, when I felt that too much of the Trump movement was kind of saying this was a hoax and fake news, and that you could really lose a lot of Republicans, establishment Republicans, that could have gone the other way.